Hello and welcome to episode 91 of Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. This month saw the release of the not at all confusingly named Coming to America, the sequel to 1988's Coming to America. As with many late-coming sequels or reboots, anticipation has been mixed, but we thought this would be a great time for another Can We Still Be Friends First, an episode where we watch and discuss a movie and its sequel. With Eddie Murphy making a comeback of sorts, we were glad to also revisit him at the height of his powers.
In 1988, Coming to America was a commercial smash, making over $288 million worldwide. Eddie Murphy was about as bankable a star as he ever would be, and co-star Arsenio Hall was on the brink of hosting his iconic talk show. In 2021, the release of Coming to America has been met with the reception we've come to expect of decades-later sequels. Some fervent excitement, some cynical mistrust. Even though Coming to America has earned a spot in the Comedy Movie Hall of Fame, and the early reviews of Coming to America are less than glowing, it's interesting to note that critics in 1988 weren't much kinder to the original.
But is the return to Zamunda a joyous one?
Or when we think of garbage, do we think of King Akeem? Keep listening.
Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, lived a handsome prince. He was attended by devoted servants.
Do you think perhaps just once I might use the bathroom by myself?
Most amusing, sir.
Wipers!
And engaged by royal decree.
Why? Why can't I find my own wife?
We've gone to a great deal of trouble to select for you a very fine wife.
I want a woman that's going to arouse my intellect as well as my loins.
Where will you find such a woman?
In America.
So he traveled across the sea to the land of opportunity, which is where the fairy tale ends and our story begins.
Behold, Simi!
That is the trailer to the original 1988 Coming to America, and I think that's how I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to say Coming to America. That's 1988.
T.O. Coming to
Coming
America.
to America is going to be how I say 2021 sequel.
With the number 2. I can tell the inflection in your voice there enough to where I think our listeners will be able to pick up on that as well.
Okay, good. I hope so.
And where that inflection is missing, we can either restate it,
sure,
or we can say the sequel.
Right. Okay.
If we need to.
That's fine. That's fine. So that was for Coming to America, the original. I think that I don't know, this movie. I feel like it's more or less a given that people have seen it, and I don't say that to make you feel bad for not having seen it until recently.
I think that's true. Yeah, we'll get into my first viewings, which were just recently, which is weird.
Yeah.
It is weird because it's such a cultural staple. It is, it's a staple of a movie.
But it's one of those things where I think so many people think everybody's seen it that they don't think to show it or bring up like watching it.
True.
Right?
True.
It's just one of those things that we all kind of are familiar with. So, but if you don't remember the plot, or if you hadn't seen Coming to America, Prince Akeem, played by Eddie Murphy, he's supposed to be married, and his marriage is supposed to be arranged, but he wants to go find his own wife. He wants to marry for love, and so he goes to where there would be queens to marry. He goes to Queens.
And I love that trailer. To me is also a blast from the past, just having voiceover narration like that, just laying it all out for you.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I miss that. We need more hand-holding as far as what this narrative is going to be about.
I agree. Instead, I feel like a lot more trailers just show us most of the movie.
Right, because they kind of need to.
Right, because they don't have that guy.
They need the guy.
But yeah, so we've never done an Eddie Murphy movie, I don't think, right?
Nope.
So our first Eddie Murphy movie, but our second John Landis movie, which I wasn't remembering, is a Blues Brothers. Blues Brothers is a John Landis movie.
Right.
I don't think of John Landis as kind of having a thing.
Landis is kind of a guy that was sort of the guy behind the scenes when it was like a big star vehicle. So you had
Right.
Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi in Blues Brothers, and it's really their movie. And I
Yeah.
think it's the same here with Coming to America. This is really Eddie Murphy's movie.
Yeah.
Arsenio Hall as well, but like you're not really thinking too much about who's behind the camera on this one.
No, though I think it's funny. I don't know. He also had a big hand in some Michael Jackson.
Yeah, he did the Thriller video,
stuff.
right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, he did Thriller.
Yeah.
It's interesting how much he's been involved with. Animal House he directed. Spies Like Us I don't know if you saw that, but that's
I
a
haven't seen
Chevy
that one,
Chase.
right.
Like,
He's just kind of one of those like 70s, 80s SNL-ish kind of guys. He kind of shapes comedy for that era.
But he's not really a name. He's not one of the like legends well known, but his name comes up a lot.
It seems like he knows when to just kind of let these larger than life stars do their thing.
Yeah.
And to sort of make a movie that can support that, whatever it looks like.
Yeah. So we don't often go back to the kind of 80s classic comedy well either, I don't think.
For the podcast,
Yeah,
you mean?
for the podcast.
Not too often. I'm trying to think. Is part of it that it's almost too baked into like the culture and who we are that part of us feels like what could we possibly add to it?
I think so.
And really the only reason we're doing it this time is because we've got the sequel.
Right.
And we're kind of like, oh, this gives us a good excuse to talk about this movie that, pretty much everybody's seen. And
right.
I think these are some of the hardest episodes we do because I remember going back to even Blues Brothers, and that episode is kind of like, well, what are we going to add to this that hasn't already been said?
Right.
So, I think we'll kind of do our best with this one here. I'm coming at it as someone who, kind of like you with Titanic, where it's like everybody had seen this movie and somehow you missed it.
Right.
Somehow I missed Coming to America.
Yeah, so you have a first viewing, but it was for this podcast.
Yeah, a better question is why didn't I see it? And I actually have not seen a lot of Eddie Murphy.
Have you seen like Trading Places?
No. I've seen Beverly Hills Cop.
Okay.
But
I haven't seen like 48 Hours.
No.
I actually, I haven't seen Boomerang. I haven't seen Harlem Nights.
Now, to me, like, Eddie Murphy was the guy who, and this is like, later Eddie Murphy, but he was the guy that I would go see his movies in the theater because it's what my younger brothers and sisters wanted to see, like Nutty Professor, Dr. Dolittle, the later sort of Eddie Murphy family Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that that's who I thought Eddie Murphy was. Now, Eddie Murphy, I definitely knew from SNL. Mm-hmm. Like, I had seen some of his like classic sketches. I watched the best of Eddie Murphy SNL.
Right.
I think back then it was VHS. I watched it a couple times. So I knew he was funny. I don't know what it was. I just didn't grow up with his movies. Mm-hmm. Coming to America, I know, was just a constant on cable.
Yeah.
But I didn't have cable. So it was never on my TV. I think that's how a lot of people caught it if they didn't catch it in the theater, it was just something that was ubiquitously on cable. Mm-hmm. I didn't grow up with a lot of friends who quoted it, who loved it, who ever talked about it as their favorite movie. So, it's just one of those that, as we say in the podcast often, slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
But I think we mentioned this a little bit in our last episode. It might have gotten cut as we were previewing, but we talked about Dolomite a little bit.
Right.
And Dolomite was a movie I watched and I really liked.
Dolomite is My Name.
Dolomite is My Name, which came out, 2 years ago, maybe?
Was it?
Was it a year ago? Something like that?
Yeah.
It was a Netflix movie where Eddie Murphy plays Rudy Ray Moore, and I really liked that movie. And so I, for that reason, was excited about the sequel to Coming to America. And as I said in my last episode, excited that it gave me a reason to finally watch Coming to America. The other thing that I think caught me by surprise, I guess I just didn't know. I was completely ignorant of how important and beloved this movie is for so many in the Black community.
Yeah.
On Twitter, I started seeing so much talk about the sequel. And also, there's this woman who comes into the library, and sometimes we talk about movies. And I had mentioned that I was going to watch Coming to America, and she knows that we have a podcast, and I said we were going to talk about it on the podcast. This is at the library, if you don't know where I work. And she was just like, you need to be careful with that one. Like, we like that one. And so I'm kind of going into that with like, okay, this is a revered movie. This is a very revered movie to the Black community. And so I just didn't have any idea. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of became more aware of that a couple of years ago when there's a basketball player on the Bucks, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is Nigerian, but his family went to Greece, and so he grew up in Greece, but he's also very connected to his Nigerian roots. And when he got his first signature Nike shoe, one of the first colorways that came out was a Coming to America colorway that was like inspired by the kind of the costumes and the gold that he wears and stuff.
And like
so,
this was a Zamunda thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And yeah, they refer to it in Coming to America, but Zamunda and Wakanda, there's kind of a similar sort of cultural pride and connection that's felt there. So yes, certainly we're not going to be trying to like see that in the movie. Like, we're not trying to anticipate what those cultural connections would be. We're also aware that there is something culturally that won't be connecting with us, and we're not going to be trying to like pick it apart,
right? Or
along those lines,
or make any assumptions
Right.
of what a different community thinks of this movie.
Yeah.
But it's something that I am very I'm aware of now. It's not something I knew was sort of part of that canon for the
Yeah.
Black community.
Yeah.
And so, in that way, even because I had not seen it before at all, now having seen it, it's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially for 1988.
Yes.
That this would have been a very special movie and was doing some very different things and also is just very funny.
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah, and the depiction of Queens is very I don't know. It's not a New York that I feel like I've seen in 80s movies or 90s movies depictions of New York.
Right. Well, and just kind of flipping the script, because, certainly my growing up view of Africa was poverty, sad to say.
Yes.
And to flip the script on that and say, no, this is a beautiful culture we're going to talk about here. And to flip the script and make America kind of the shithole.
Right.
And to still make it funny. Something that you could say that's kind of subversive when you really think about it, especially for the time.
Yeah.
But then because it's so funny, you almost don't think about it.
We'll get into that a little bit more.
So why don't we? What about you though? What's your experience with this movie?
This was not one that I had watched along. I can't act like, oh wow, you haven't seen it. I saw it, I don't know, in the last 10 years. I was watching some early Eddie Murphy stuff, and so I saw it Coming to America, and so I'd only seen it once. But so yeah, I basically my story is that I've seen it, and but I just remember thinking it was funny. There were a few things that I was like, oh, that's what that's from, and and seeing kind of the origins of Eddie Murphy in makeup playing so many different characters.
I thought that was new with Nutty Professor.
Yeah, of course I did too. I hadn't seen it anywhere. But no, that was something that he was very good at for a very long time. And so, I really liked it. And I hadn't seen it since. But I actually was kind of excited for Coming to America, just because, like we talked about last week, there's the Eddie Sans, Dolomite is my name. I really enjoyed. And Eddie Murphy back on Saturday Night Live. There's just sort of a whole lot of...
And it was a great episode.
Right.
He was back on guesting. And he just looked, he looked so effortless doing that,
That was the thing. That was the thing. Because I guess so much of the family, Eddie Murphy, had seemed so... like he was trying so hard. Like he was just mugging so hard. That to see him be that kind of funny again in that very cool, slick way...
Yeah.
It gave me
just
a lot
light
of
on
hope
his feet.
Right. It gave me a lot of hope for Coming to America. I trusted he probably wouldn't be doing this, especially because he does seem like the kind of person who takes a lot of pride in his work and what he's created and wouldn't be flippant about cashing in on it.
Yeah.
And so, long story short, we'll get to it. I think he's still got it, Eddie Murphy's still really pretty great. But yeah, that's my experience with Coming to America. It's not very long, but I have seen it. So,
so on the rewatch, what would you have given your Letterboxd rating?
All right. Well, okay. I think first time viewing, I would have given it 4 stars. Around there. I felt like there were some pacing things, some things about it that I was just sort of like. Between gags, it didn't hold together as well for me. So it's probably 3.5, but I don't know.
Yeah.
3.5, 4. I don't know. What about you for your first viewing?
I was gonna give it a 4.
Yeah.
Because it was such an easy watch, and especially coming into it, not having seen it and not having watched it in its time at all, for me to laugh as much as I did still.
Yeah.
I was just kind of surprised that I did. Because,
Really?
Sometimes you go into these comedies and you're like, if it's something that's a little bit older, and I'm going to watch this very aware of sort of contextualizing it. Would I have found this funny at the time? So even if I'm not laughing a lot right now, I'm like, but it's still a great comedy because I could see it's breaking a lot of ground. Coming to America, I feel like not only is it breaking ground for its time, it is still very funny.
Yeah.
And that's me saying it as with fresh eyes. I don't have any relation to this other than my first viewing right now. It's a funny movie. If it were to come out today, it would be a successful comedy, I think, you know. So yeah, I would probably give it 4 stars. I think you're right. I think there's some stuff that you could look at and be like, yeah, this is sort of touches of mainstream comedies, where it's just sort of like sometimes stringing along plot between gags and things like that. It's not going to throw you any plot loops or twists or anything. It's a very standard, just, mainstream comedy, but so well done.
Yeah.
And as I've already said, the other things it's doing outside of like plot are just, they're interesting to think about. One thing I found that I was not expecting is I had that image on my mind of, what I'm assuming like the movie poster, just sort of like Prince Akeem, Eddie Murphy as Prince Akeem coming to America. I knew the basic plot was this is an African prince who comes to America. That's all I knew. Mm-hmm.
And you didn't know why he came to America or anything?
No, I had no idea. And so I think as a white person watching this, my initial assumption was that this was going to be a lot like his SNL sketch where he dresses up like a white person and kind of sees the racism. Mm-hmm. This movie is just not that concerned with racism. I mean, that's not to say that it doesn't acknowledge that racism exists, but it's just not about whiteness at all.
No, not at all.
It's just, and I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
And I found out that the only white person of name in it at all is Louis Anderson, and I found out later that the only reason he was even in it was because the studio said
we need a white person.
We need a white person in it, and they were kind of like, well, we don't mind Louis Anderson, so we'll put Louis Anderson in it. You know, it subverted my own assumptions. Yeah. My assumption was this was going to be a movie that the comedy was going to be someone who is treated like royalty in Africa, coming to a racist country and being treated like dirt by white people.
Right.
That was my assumption of what this movie would be. Mm-hmm. Not at all.
No.
It's a better movie than that.
Right. And not only that, like it does portray and at times use as comedy socioeconomic kind of they go to the worst part of Queens.
Yeah.
And that's played for laughs some, but there's also well-to-do black families like at the center of it, that this isn't in any way, shape, or form a monolithic portrayal of black people.
Right.
And like you say, it's not concerned with race. It's not making a big deal about that, which is, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm not like, it's just like, well, that's really cool. Like,
and actually that was intentional. I mean, obviously it's intentional, but I remember there was I was reading sort of an oral history of the making of it, and John Landis said that that's one of the things he liked about the movie was that it was going to be a black movie that didn't make a big deal about being a black movie.
It's just normalizing blackness.
It was a normalizing movie, and that was an important thing to do, and it wasn't going to make a big fuss about it.
But yeah, I think that's really interesting that you say that. I think that would probably be true for a lot of people if they thought about it, that this movie is subverting in that way those expectations.
You talked about how, yes, there are well-to-do families in this movie. It's not just poor people in poverty, but even the well-to-do families, part of its humor, and it doesn't really have anything to do with them being black families, but it's just saying that America's idea of what it is to be well-to-do is pretty pathetic.
Yeah, like when he's telling him, you work hard 20 or 30 years, you could have a house like this.
Yeah. Mr. McDowell, played by John Amos, which is a great role. I love him in this movie, and I love how he's trying to woo the royal family at his house, and he woos them with like frozen pigs in a blanket. He said they're frozen, but they taste so they're just as good. And that's just a really funny statement on like the sort of that capitalist consumerist mentality. We end up cheapening our own prosperity. Like that is our prosperity, is like frozen pigs in a blanket.
Right.
That's how you know you made it in America.
So aside from what you already said, was there anything, other things that you thought you knew about it as far as like who was involved with it or anything like that surprised you?
There was so if you first sit down to watch this movie, Prince Akeem, which is the most like on the face of it, Eddie Murphy, obviously.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, he's funny.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking like Eddie Murphy funny. I'm kind of like, this is kind of a dry, straight
He's kind of
character.
the straight man, yeah.
And so what was surprising to me was, because again, I knew nothing about this movie, was then seeing that not just him, but Arsenio Hall were also playing all these different characters. And so when I first saw that barbershop scene, I'm just like, these actors, they look funny, but like but the makeup is so good.
It's amazing, especially on
it's the same makeup
Saul.
people who did American Werewolf in London.
Oh, okay.
That's why it's so good.
Right.
John Landis brought them in, and I kid you not, it was not till the ending credits that I was fully convinced that the older Jewish man in that barbershop was Eddie Murphy.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, Saul.
Was Saul, yeah.
Not just the makeup, but his voice.
Everything about it just blew me away.
Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber. Now that was a great boxer.
You damn right.
I suppose nobody in here ever heard of Cassius Clay.
We got a point. Cassius Clay was a bad motherfucker. Hey, I ain't saying Clay ain't bad. I'm just saying I stopped liking Cassius Clay once he changed his name to Muhammad Ali. What kind of shit is that?
Wait a second. A man has the right to change his name to whatever he wants to change it to. And if a man wants to be called Muhammad Ali, God damn it, this is a free country. You should respect his wishes and call the man Muhammad Ali.
His mama named him Clay. I'm gonna call him Clay. Mm-hmm. That's right.
I say Clay.
Get out of here.
That's right. That's right. He gonna always be Clay to me. I don't give a fuck what he changed name to. He is Clay. He Clay to me. I say Clay.
Well, then you're a putz. The three of you. 3 putzes. You should change the name outside from Mighty Sharp to the 3 putzes.
Then you have, the preacher Arsenio Hall,
Reverend Brown.
That's a hilarious character. The
Randy Watson,
yeah,
and Sexual Chocolate. I actually think next to Saul, I think that Randy Watson's makeup is the best because they changed Eddie Murphy's facial structure so much.
This is the soul singer, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
That I was sort of like, it took me more than it probably should have to be like, wait, that's Eddie Murphy,
right?
I love how the extra characters show those extra brilliant sides of Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall.
And so, when I started noticing all of this, I'm like, this is why Coming to America is so great, because Prince Akeem is a great straight man. And then it's just elevated so exponentially by all these different characters that it's just fun to watch. I can see why it's so classic,
And I think part of the joke of Prince Akeem is that Eddie Murphy is playing such kind of an awkward, not smooth character too. So it's not only Eddie Murphy's being the straight man, he's playing against Eddie Murphy's smoothness and type.
Right.
Which would have been so well known to audiences in 1988. So for me to say that like he seems to be like better in the makeup characters, it doesn't do service to how well he is playing and
Prince
acting
Akeem.
as Prince Akeem.
I think he's basically playing a straight man off of his own type of what we've come to know as Eddie Murphy's comedy.
Right.
The way he so innocently plays off of the crassness of Queens.
Yeah.
There's something so funny about him singing joyously as everyone's just swearing him out in the alley. It just gets more and more obnoxious, and he doesn't seem to notice it even,
Yeah.
Lonely hours and moments of despair to be loved. Whoa, what a feeling.
Another way that you could assume this movie was going to go is that Prince Akeem, in his naivete, is eaten alive by Queens.
Yeah, that doesn't really happen.
But he's not, because he's so rich, it doesn't matter. Like, anything that happens, he knows he can just get out. Like, they steal all his stuff right at the beginning, and he doesn't care. Like, he's just like, they've got my stuff.
Right.
You can't touch him. And because of that, he kind of like is able to maintain this innocence that makes the movie pretty kind of refreshing, and it doesn't carry with it an edge that you might expect a depiction of like lower income urban neighborhood would carry with it. It gets to depict it, but it doesn't exploit it. It doesn't wallow in it. It doesn't mark it as dangerous. It's just, this is how some people live.
And it is interesting to me, though, that, and you alluded to this in our intro, that the critics really didn't care that much for this movie. It was immediately, obviously, an audience favorite with how much money it made.
Right.
And I was kind of looking back at, what qualms did the critics really have with this? And I think it's kind of what we talked about of they were focusing too much on Prince Akeem and thinking that compared to the Eddie Murphy we knew from like Beverly Hills Cop and 48 Hours, that like this seemed almost like boring to a lot of the critics.
Right.
And it's like the audience was smart enough to realize, well, yeah, but it's funny to see Eddie Murphy diversify a little bit.
Right.
This is not him playing his Eddie Murphy thing.
Right.
And then you still get the Eddie Murphy thing with the other characters. So what's not to love, critics?
Yeah. It's got everything you want from him and something new, God forbid. So I don't know if this is going to work, but what are some of the scenes that like that you found to be the funniest or the moments? I know we've maybe talked about a couple.
Yeah, I mean, like I think even just right off the bat,
yeah,
just the funniness of like how ridiculous the regalness of it is. The rose petals and the having the bathers.
The chamber orchestra waking him up with music.
Yeah.
Yeah. That it's such a strong opening. And when he asks, we heard it in the trailer, I think, but when he asks to go to the bathroom alone. And just every detail of that is great.
And it's smart because you need to believe that he wants to go to someplace like Queens. So how do you make that funny? You just make royalty ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like super ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know?
One part that like kills me every time is when Oha, he's kind of like the top person of the serving. Played by Paul Bates. When he just steps forward and starts singing that song about the woman he's going to marry.
Queen to be, a queen to be forever, a queen who'll do whatever His Highness desires. She's your queen.
Like, I just didn't expect it, and he goes on and on and on. I love that part.
And also in that opening scene, and it's not necessarily comedy, but just the dance routine even was like, wow. And that was choreographed by Paula Abdul.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You just don't see that much in today's comedies because it's still big budget. I don't remember the exact number, but you're talking about close to like 100 dancers, I think, there.
Yeah.
So that was just cool.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is too retrospective 2021 lens. But after seeing Coming to America, I don't think it's too critical. But it felt like there was a sort of outdated, sexist, misogynistic angle that felt uncomfortable at times.
I think that's there, and I think that Coming to America is very aware of that and tries to almost combat it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But it's there.
Yeah.
You know, and so that was one of those instances, and there weren't many in the movie, where I did kind of have to compartmentalize a little bit and say, well, you know, honestly, if I'm going to hold this comedy to that standard, every comedy I watched in the 80s had essentially the same viewpoint.
And that might be part of why we don't go back and watch those. You and I go back and watch those very much because we would absolutely be like, oh gosh, this is not funny.
Geez, I mean, even John Landis, you mean look at Animal House.
Oh,
you know?
Of course, yeah.
So, I mean, you're right. It's there.
I think one thing that does temper it is that Prince Akeem isn't really there for that.
No.
Like taking part in that. Semi does, I think, a little bit more. But then you also have somebody like Reverend Brown, who is obviously supposed to be gross in his leering and lecherousness.
Right.
So there are varying shades of it. And ultimately, Prince Akeem, that's one of the things that he is dissatisfied with his life, is that he wants a woman that he sees as a whole person.
Right.
And doesn't want just, someone who will do everything he says. But like you said, the reason I mentioned it is because Coming to America seems aware of that.
Yeah.
That there needed to be some movement on that point.
So maybe we should let's start bringing in Coming to America then.
Yeah.
Hey, what you doing back here? Mufasa.
Say it again, feel right in his...
I've just discovered that I may have a son here in this land.
How much child support is she getting from?
The king pays no child support.
No child support for 30 years and you came back? You was a dummy.
Hello, I am Hakim Joffer, king of Zamunda. You are the heir to the throne.
Yes, my son.
He's supposed to be like...
So I have to kind of question our entire endeavor with this a little bit because I was on Twitter and I follow Charlie Dates. He's a senior pastor at Progressive Baptist Church in Chicago. And he tweeted about Coming to America, and this just caught my eye thinking about us recording this.
You tweeted about Coming to America or Coming to America?
Well, both. I mean,
Okay.
I'm going to read you the tweet, and I want you to kind of respond to it, and then we're going to get into sort of Coming to America, the sequel.
Okay.
So he says, first of all, important, this is in all caps, Coming to America, the sequel, must be enjoyed as a distinct feature on its own merit. It's been too long to judge it against the first. Eddie Murphy and Arsenio caught lightning in a bottle in 1988. They didn't realize they were making a classic. End of tweet.
Okay.
So I think it'll be interesting to kind of bounce back and forth between the two movies, but I think he's got a point there in that...
Oh, definitely.
And I also think it's a sign that there was a lot of apprehension about this sequel. Like, I think there was a lot of
from people who held it dearly.
From people who held it very dearly of like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
You know, you can sense it, I think, in that tweet of like almost like bracing yourself.
Yeah.
Like brace yourself
listen,
for the worst.
Of course it's not going to be. Well, I mean, that's good to note. I honestly, though, feel like any comparing I was planning on doing is favorable.
Okay. So let's just start with maybe
maybe that response tells me you didn't like it as much as I did.
Maybe not. First impressions, though. Let's do our thing. What would be your letterboxed rating now if you were to letterboxed rate this?
Honestly, I would put it 4 stars.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, that is 4 stars on its own merit, just standing on its own.
Okay.
Based on how much I enjoyed the experience.
I did laugh. So on that level, it has to have some success to it, right?
Yes.
And I think that Charlie Date's point is well taken, that we should kind of look at them as 2 separate movies. They are also inseparable, I think.
Of course.
I would give this, just flat out so we know kind of where we're starting, I would probably give this a 3-star.
Okay.
So I'm not going to say it was terrible.
Okay.
I'm not even going to say it shouldn't have been made.
Oh, wow. Okay. But you're thinking it.
But no, I wouldn't even... I had to question it at some points in the movie.
Okay.
I feel like this movie didn't have the consistency that the first movie
yeah.
did.
No, I would agree with that.
It was a very inconsistent movie. And I also feel like there was so much of me that in this movie, I was like, I wish they would have done this more. Or I wish they would have done this more. Or I wish they hadn't leaned on this so much. Whereas in the first movie, I just didn't... Those things didn't come up to me.
Sure.
It's a mixed review for me, which I think is sort of so far. We're only like 2 days into this release. That seems to be not only the critic consensus, but also sort of the audience consensus. It's a little mixed, you know. We should maybe start with what really works well in this, and what I think they did really well, as far as like, so it didn't just seem like a cash grab. I guess.
Right. Well, let me say before we do that, I definitely switched my mindset about a quarter of the way through the movie. I was feeling really critical at the beginning, and it is not as original. I mean, obviously, but it's not as original. It rests on references to the original more than I would have liked it to, including just saying lines again.
Or just, actually showing clips from the first movie.
Right.
That didn't bother me, by the way.
Including a clip that I was like, I didn't really like that part of that first movie, and then they showed it again. And it was during the sequence where En Vogue comes out, then Salt and Pepper comes out, and I was like, ugh. But then, kind of like what we were saying at the beginning, I was like, just because these aren't culturally nostalgic for me, that doesn't mean that it's not clicking. Like it's not... It's not out of place in this movie. It's not like... So I just kind of gave myself over to it. And I don't think it had so much to do with the interview with Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall that I read, but I think that was part of it, to know they didn't want to make this unless they made a movie that they wanted to make, that it wasn't a cash grab for them, that they wouldn't have returned to these characters if they didn't feel like it. And so I was trying to look at it more through the lens of like, why did they want to do this?
Right.
And like, what fun are they having? And they're bringing back En Vogue and Salt and Pepper, who, like, what are they doing? And then seeing through to the end of the movie where they bring back so many people who maybe haven't even acted really since the original Coming to America.
Right.
Like, I'm like, this is kind of a reunion movie.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
In its own way.
And I am there for that. That part I am completely there.
Yeah, and so I guess I sort of felt like everything was in that vein. And even when the jokes felt cheaply throwback, I was kind of like, okay, that's fine. But I will also grant you that this movie loses me in more places than the first one did. And I even said that the first one lost me in a few places. I think that his son...
That's the weak link, honestly. To me, I have a real hard time with the character of Lavelle and centering so much of the movie on this character that honestly is just kind of boring. I don't know if it's how the character is written, if there's just not a lot given to them, but I didn't find him funny.
No.
Maybe in like 1 or 2 scenes, but that's about it. And there are definitely funny actors you could have put in this role. And who knows, maybe that's just they really still wanted to make this an Eddie Murphy movie, and so they kind of wanted to hedge their bets, and but this movie has to center on that character,
right?
Which I thought was just completely flat.
Yeah, and I don't know that actor, Jermaine Fowler. I don't
really either. I think he's been on
really.
I looked at his IMDb. It looks like he's worked with like BoJack Horseman.
Right.
I haven't seen any of the actual like movies or live action stuff he's been in.
He was in Sorry to Bother You, but I don't remember him.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that movie too, and I don't remember him. I mean, he might be a really good actor. I just don't feel like the character is all that captivating or interesting. The family around the character is hysterical.
Yeah.
I love Leslie Jones in this movie. She was so funny.
Unreal.
So funny in this movie.
And of course, Tracy Morgan.
Of course, Tracy Morgan, but I just have in my notes, like we need more Leslie Jones in this. This movie needs more Leslie Jones. She kind of is pulling off whatever new thing this needed that had that Eddie Murphy magic.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you something, baby. You a prince now. Okay? And one day, all this is gonna be yours. This long-ass table, all this food, this whole damn kingdom.
I always thought that Mika was going to be queen.
A woman isn't allowed to rule Zamunda. It's the law.
So, it's going to be this guy.
I've lost my appetite.
So, is anybody gonna tell me why these mashed potatoes is black?
It's caviar.
It's caviar what?
Caviar, Mom.
You know our cousin named that.
She is really, I think, carrying a lot of this movie. And she's not in it enough. I don't think she's in it enough.
I agree.
And I think just even conceptually, this movie loses me a little bit because it's not really coming to America. It's America coming to Zamunda. They could have even called it Coming to Zamunda.
Yeah.
But so much of the comedy of the first one is this prince who is royalty coming to America.
Yeah.
And it's a fish out of water story, like we already talked about.
And it's still a fish out of water story.
But not interesting.
Right.
I was really struggling to come into terms with what I was meant by that. Why is that not interesting, but Eddie Murphy going to America is? And I'm going to give all credit to Odie Henderson, who I mentioned in my Defy Bloods episode. He's one of my favorite critics right now. He writes for RogerEbert.com. I don't have direct quotes. I don't have it up in front of me. But his general argument was that even if you don't live there, you know Queens.
Right.
Or you know New York. Or you know America.
Right.
You don't know Zamunda. So you're getting a fish out of water story of someone going to a place that you don't know. So there's no comedy to play off of. The Lavelle character, none of his type of comedy that would have worked with Prince Akeem in Queens works with Lavelle in Zamunda because you just don't have that relation to it. You don't have that friction, I guess. Or it's just not as funny because it's not Eddie Murphy. I don't know. That whole bit of this movie, I feel like, is just kind of dead. And therefore, that whole love story that this thing has to center around is not as... I just don't care about it as much.
Right, yeah. You don't really care so much about his son. And Mirembe, you don't get to know like all that much about, but it's also like unbelievably clear from the first moment they meet each other. It's like, oh, they're going to be together. I don't think they raised the stakes well. I don't think they established the stakes very well, let alone raise them. And I don't know why it didn't feel so important to me. That's why like seeing it as a reunion movie more than as a continuation of the story, a necessary continuation of the story, felt like that was a turning point for me in my viewing.
I could see that. I mean, when it's funny, it's really funny. But it's just there were whole chunks of this movie where I was just kind of out of it. Like that whole thing with like where Lavelle is trying to kind of learn how to be a prince and the lion whiskers and all that stuff. I'm like, I don't know. But then again, you get Leslie Jones back in, and I'm like, all right, I'm back in with this. Or Tracy Morgan,
or
you just get
even Eddie Murphy,
Eddie Murphy, or
Arsenio Hall back, and
Wesley Snipes even is great. Oh man, I laughed so hard at the entire army using the shake weight. That's right. I laughed out loud so hard. I that's such a stupid joke, but so funny. Yeah.
It's so Eric Cohn. It's not. He writes for IndieWire. I don't often read his stuff, but he said the way he put it is those who adore the original will feel like they've been revisited by an old friend or perhaps the dirty uncle whose jokes are a bit frayed but still pointed enough. And that's how I felt it. Like, I don't know what the ratio is, but there certainly was like eye rolls and then laughs, like genuine laughs. Like, okay, that's pretty funny. And I think that one thing that I kind of called an asset is also a liability for this movie, that Eddie Murphy didn't want to make a movie unless he was like happy with like the story. And I think what he was happy with was, do I get a fairly sizable role in this movie?
Does it still get to be an Eddie Murphy movie?
Right. And for that reason, then Jermaine Fowler and his daughters are just tremendously underwritten and underdeveloped.
And none of those daughters are really given a role. Or even like, Leslie Jones is really funny, but, none of those other daughters have any sort of comedic thing that they add to the movie.
Right.
You could have even had a role where one of the daughters goes to America and plays the Prince Akeem role.
Right.
And just plays that person who is naive and, about American ways.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think it's good that they show that his daughters are already more world-weary than he was at that age, right?
About like, how On Fleek is already out of style.
Yeah, but also just like sociopolitically, they're more aware.
Right.
And I think that that's good because why would Akeem have raised daughters to be so sheltered, so bubbled?
True.
So there are things that make sense about it, but they don't do enough with it. And not to mention the fact that Kiki Lane, who plays his oldest daughter, we've seen her in If Beale Street Could Talk. Like, she was incredible. She can do so much, and she just isn't given a whole lot to do. So there's a question. Like, how much of the plot of this movie is really supposed to be dissected? And how much of it is you shouldn't make it if you're not ready for it to be dissected? Like, if you're not going to be kind of aware. And if you are going to be aware of certain aspects that needed improving or correcting, but then not go all the way with them or not, like, fully kind of realize those, where does the responsibility on the filmmaker's part lie and where does our graciousness need to go?
I guess one of my major issues is that it doesn't feel like a movie that's about going to America. It really is just called that because it's the sequel to Coming to America. What's disappointing about that is that you could have done new comedy with what America became.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they kind of hit on it when he goes there and they talk about gentrification.
Yeah.
And then the barbershop scene, which is great, again, and they talk about, that we got Nazis now, but they look like the Geek Squad.
It is so good to see you. The neighborhood seems to be thriving.
Oh, that's that gentrification. When the colored man had this neighborhood, didn't have shit. And the white man moved in, they got the coffee houses and the dog parks, and my brownstone on Fox Boulevard is worth $10 million.
Your brownstone ain't worth no $10 million.
My brownstone is too worth $10 million, and I'm gonna sell it and get me a Tesla.
America has certainly changed since our last visit. Your black president finally united this great country.
Yeah, but it's all gone to hell now.
We all gonna die. Just don't know how.
It's gonna be the Nazis. Nazis are back. But now they dress like that Best Buy Geek Squad and they wanna kill people. Anybody could be a Nazi. You ever notice that, Prince?
Akeem now is an African.
Now, if you had, like, say, like we talked about, like one of his daughters came with and she got the whole Coming to America experience from the first one, you could have dived a lot deeper into that comedy. Like, what's funny to pick apart about Queens now? Now, maybe that's just a different movie and they didn't want to make that movie.
Yeah.
They wanted to go to Zamunda and they wanted to have Zamunda really be sort of the center of that movie. I guess that's fine, but then I guess you got to have someone better than Lavelle to carry that.
Right.
But that's not, I mean, I don't want to take away from the stuff that was funny in this,
because, yeah. And the reason I say 4 stars, which feels high, the reason I say that is because at the end of the day, I thought it was funny, pretty much beginning to end. I thought it was fun. And I wasn't lost during the scenes that didn't work. For as imperfect or underdeveloped as the romance between Lavelle and Mirembe is, I really like Mirembe as a character too.
Yeah,
like she's fairly well rounded for the amount of screen time she has, and there's also kind of something interesting happening there, where she is one of the people who is coming to America and doesn't want it. Right? Like, they get there and obviously, like, the marriage with Reverend Brown or whatever. But the idea that Lavelle has is, well, you can't have what you want in Zamunda, come to America. And she gets to America and she's like, I don't want to do it here.
Please excuse my intrusion. Carry on, please.
Wait, we in overtime now. I need $200 more.
What you need is to start this ceremony before I come up there and beat you.
Mary, if our son wants to be married in this glorious house of... In this glorious house...
This is a house of God, isn't it?
More like a crack house of God.
Ah, then it shall be as magnificent as a palace ceremony. Come, sit.
Yes, continue.
This doesn't feel right.
What? You don't want to get married?
No, I'm not saying I don't want to get married.
What?
Someone is my home. It is my pride and my joy. And what about your sister?
I think it could have been a very simple choice and one that could have been, essentially problematic to say, oh, well, look, this character who's African can't get what she wants, so she goes to America. There's that part of it too. Like Lavelle is interesting in that way, in that even though he has been a part of like the system of America that oppresses black people,
which I think was illustrated really well with the Colin Jost.
Oh my gosh, I love
cameo.
that scene.
That scene is
Colin
great.
Jost was great.
Yes, he really was.
And so was Jermaine Fowler in that scene. Like, he's got scenes.
I don't deny that Jermaine Fowler is probably a really good actor, and probably has a good future ahead of him. I just, I think the character was underwritten.
Yeah,
I do.
But it feels very true that America has this view of itself that even people who have received the injustice of its system still buy into it,
yeah.
And it's not leaned on heavily, like obviously my point of view is being brought into that very strongly. But it would have been a simple choice for them to make that like Mirembe is like, oh, America, like this is great. But she gets there and she's like, no, I don't want this.
It's kind of gross.
Yeah. I want to do it on my terms. I don't want to do it running away,
Right.
Yeah. All that to say, just generally, I wasn't so put off by some of the shortcomings.
Right. I mean, I think it elevates itself more than just being a cash grab.
Yeah.
I think it does do that.
I do too.
I think it was probably very aware of that was going to be the perception.
Oh, I mean, they talk about that.
That's right.
When they talk about American movies.
Yes. Yeah.
How that's all superhero movies and reboots and sequels.
That nobody asked for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously it's self-aware in that way. And I think that there are key ways in which the movie has elevated itself above that. Mm-hmm. And we should go over what some of those are. So, I mean, I'm honestly, Zamunda still looks great. Ruth Carter did the costuming.
Gosh, dang. Yeah. She's somebody that when I see her name in the credits, I'm already going to be like, okay, this movie's at least going to be great.
It's going to be good to look at. It's going to be good eye candy.
And
yeah.
Man, I love the costumes in this movie.
Yeah.
I thought they were so great.
They're even, I mean, that's a way I think that it even improved upon the original, and the original was good. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it. You mentioned it earlier on in the episode of like, it's good to see that Eddie Murphy still has the magic, and I think he does.
Yeah.
In this movie, it's very clear, and in that when he brings those characters back, they still have all the life to them that they had in the first one. Same with Arsenio Hall. Although his Baba character, that thing is frightening.
It's so scary.
I mean, and was it a he or she? I don't even know.
I think it was a he, but it was definitely too scary to be entirely funny.
I don't know that it worked that great or not, but and of course, a way that I think it elevated it was not just, hey, let's get some new familiar faces in here with Tracy Morgan and Leslie Jones, but I think they used them very well.
Yeah.
It wasn't just sort of like, let's have Leslie Jones do her thing. She does do her thing,
but it's so good.
But it's really well woven into the movie,
Yeah.
And like I said, the movie it's still entertaining.
Yeah.
That's why I said it's not terrible.
That's what I think.
It's not a bad movie. I just don't know that it's a 4-star comedy to me, because I don't know how often I'm going to want to necessarily come back to it, rewatch it. It seems like to me a streaming platform sequel that is kind of made to have everyone's attention for a few weeks.
Yeah.
And then we don't really talk about it a whole lot after
I wonder if I or everybody would feel differently about it if it had come out in theaters. Like if it would be seen as much more of a disappointment.
Or better. I mean, the idea of seeing it with a bunch of people could have made it an even better experience. Maybe those parts that I was just not having with Lavelle would be like fine in a theater because everybody else was laughing. You know?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like comedies aren't necessarily made to be watched
alone, which I was alone.
Me and Kelsey and I watched it together. But yeah, I don't know. I just really thought it was fun. I actually expected it to be worse.
Yeah.
I think is part of why I enjoyed it.
It's not necessarily a bad thing just to want to make a good mainstream comedy.
No.
It doesn't have to end up being at the level of the original
Right.
Coming to America, because the original Coming to America just turned into that. You know,
Right.
that was never even the intention of that movie.
And I
you
guess
know?
I think what you're saying is exactly what I'm feeling. Like, this is a good comedy, you know? Like, it's a good comedy.
It's fine. Yeah.
It's, and 2021 is not so different so far from 2020. You know, anything that's going to keep my attention and I'm going to have fun watching, that's going to be worth something to me,
Yeah.
you know? And I kind of am thinking, like, what did I need this movie to be? Which wasn't much. You know, it didn't need it to be much. At the beginning, I was feeling like, okay, this better prove itself. It better be as good as the original. It better. And once it started kind of rehashing some stuff, I was like, okay. But then there were times where returning to a joke worked. There were times where it didn't. I just didn't feel like I was placing that much on it. And for some reason with this one, the night I watched it, I was able to just, by the end of it, enjoy it. And, you know, even through John Legend re-singing that song, it was good, you know?
Yeah. I think this one almost took into account what Coming to America meant to the black community.
Even through to the end where they bring back the two women who rapped. You know?
Right.
Even though the beginning of the rap is exactly the same, and we already saw it in this movie too. They replayed that clip. I'm like, they found those women and
They
brought
found them.
back.
They're still there.
Like, that's awesome. And that was all over the movie, where they brought back so much of the original cast.
So it's playing on that level, where it's actually playing off of its cult classic status. And I don't know that there's much wrong with that, although I will say that when other movies have done it, I've found it really grating, you know?
Yeah, and I guess I don't know. I felt appreciative watching this movie. You know, like you were saying, this movie culturally is a window for me. You know, it's not a mirror like so many other cultural kind of mainstream things are. There was an element of just being appreciative of the fact that I was able to witness Eddie Murphy playing a character he loved, adding in actors to it who have proven themselves, like Leslie Jones and Tracy Morgan, but also using it as an opportunity to introduce new people to the kind of cultural consciousness.
And like you said, bringing in
and
people
bring
who,
back people who, you know, like we haven't talked about her, but Sherry Headley as Lisa, she's really solid in the first movie. And I thought she was great in this one. When she's drunk, that was like, I don't think she got to be funny in the first one.
Right.
I thought she was really funny in this one.
Yeah. And they brought John Ames back.
Right.
And they kept the gag going. And it's still funny. The McFlurphy.
It is very funny that John Ames is as adamantly assertive that he's not ripping off McDonald's.
Oh, that's funny.
You know, so the movie is generous, I think. And one of the things that I didn't love was how it rehashes things, but some of what makes it the best that it is when it sticks to the original characters.
I think Wesley Snipes is a really good addition to this movie.
So too.
Just as like, you know, a nice way to kind of, up the ante a little bit, bring Wesley Snipes in and he'll take care of you.
I do hope
you know?
Wesley Snipes keeps doing more comedy.
Yeah.
Because he seems to really enjoy that. Like be kind of like this really outlandish character.
Oh man, the way he enters the room, just that like side strut walk thing. I don't even know what you call it.
Yeah. So we might not be best buds on Coming to America.
No, but I will say, I don't know. I think you've convinced me a little bit. I don't want to go 4 stars,
Yeah,
but
fine.
I think I'm going to raise this to a 3.5 because I think you're right. I think that you've highlighted some ways in which I don't think I gave the movie enough credit. And at the end of the day, it was still a funny movie.
Yeah,
and I did have a good time watching it. So I think I'm willing to kind of bump it up to 3.5. But I do think I don't know that we're quite best buds on it. I don't know if I'll go that far.
But I think we're pretty much in agreement on Coming to America.
Yes, best buds on Coming to America.
All right.
Maybe a mutual understanding.
Another Can We Still Be Friends first, where we aren't ending the episode on one like type of relationship. Or,
That's right.
State of the relationship.
Are you sticking with 4?
I'm gonna. At the beginning of talking about Coming to America, I said 3.5, but that was just because it wasn't like exactly like I had remembered the first time.
This is the first one you're talking about. Yeah.
But I'm gonna raise that one to 4, and I'm gonna keep Coming to America a 4. That is one of those like, don't press me on that. Like, don't be like,
this doesn't
don't compare it to another rating.
This
I've given.
doesn't
like
mean
the fact
they're
that
on
I
equal
rated
footing.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you find? We've done this periodically. I don't know if we've kept up with it, but did you find most irrelevant IMDb trivia?
I wanted to do this, but I didn't look at anything yet. So,
all right. Well, while you're looking, I will share mine for Coming to America.
Okay.
There isn't a ton of trivia on that, so you might want to look at Coming to America for your trivia.
I'll look at this. Okay, you do. How about that? So you do the most irrelevant trivia for Coming to America. I'll do the most irrelevant trivia for Coming to America.
Nope. I'm doing for Coming to America, and you're doing it for Coming to America.
Oh,
I'm doing the sequel.
You're doing the sequel.
Yeah.
And, okay. I sorry, I misunderstood you. I didn't misunderstand the inflection. I actually misunderstood.
Okay, what I meant.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here is the most irrelevant IMDb trivia for Coming to America. The enemy state's name, Nextdoria, comes from the word next door, as in neighbor. I don't know if you picked up on that. When you heard Nextdoria, your mind probably went everywhere else except for the phrase.
I think I was thinking,
next
you know
door.
what they should have done is called it Neighboria.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They called it Nextdoria. I don't know why. What does that have to do with anything?
Well, next door, neighbor.
It's, right. Okay. Well, you know what? That it is irrelevant. It's also very obvious.
Yeah.
So
yeah, maybe it's not as irrelevant.
We're kind of
as
using those
obvious.
interchangeably right now, which is fine. That's fine.
There are actually several totally unnecessary bits of trivia, including released 33 years after the original film. And then, even though this film is rated PG-13, its predecessor was rated R.
Oh.
Interesting.
I hadn't. I had thought of that actually, but it's good that it was stated like that. Okay, so it's my turn now. This is for Coming to America, the original. Here is your most irrelevant piece of trivia for Coming to America. At around 1 hour and 1 minute, Samuel L. Jackson, who we didn't talk about, by the way, in the movie.
No, we didn't.
Has a really interesting cameo there. Anyways, he portrays a robber knocking off a fast food joint, McDowell's, and calls Maurice, Louis Anderson, who we also didn't really talk about much, didn't really need to,
no,
quote, fat boy, unquote.
Right.
In Pulp Fiction, 1994, he called, this is Samuel L. Jackson, he called a restaurant employee, quote, fat man, unquote, while it's being robbed.
Interesting.
So
that's relevant. I can't believe we hadn't talked about that.
About how Samuel L. Jackson apparently likes to call people fat something.
Right.
While robbing.
Well, he grew as a person and moved from calling people fat boys to fat men.
I don't know if I have a favorite between those two.
Oh, gosh. Oh, man.
Well, I mean, what are you going to go with? You're going to go with fat boy in Coming to America, or are you going to go with fat man in Pulp Fiction?
Right. I mean, in one scene he's the robber, in one scene he's not.
Right.
But the restaurant's being robbed.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a tough call.
It is.
You don't have to answer right now. You can think on it.
Yeah,
and maybe listeners can call in and let us know their thoughts on this. But that is...
It's just so irrelevant.
That is your most irrelevant piece of trivia for Coming to America.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Yeah. I guess it's time then for us to talk about what we're going to do next episode.
Yeah, let's do that. But before we do that, I do want to mention, if you stick around after this episode, we're going to play some of our voice messages that we've gotten. Now, here's the thing.
One of them is months old.
So we found out that for a while now, our voicemail box has not been forwarding to us.
Right.
And I mean, we're talking, we've had like thousands of missed messages here.
And
we don't have time to put all of those into the episode. So we're just going to pick one.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like what we thought was like the best one.
Or
I mean, we have another.
We have one from last episode.
We have one from last
we've got
episode.
One from months ago that we sifted through. We had the interns. listening to those
hours,
and
hours,
and it wasn't
feedback.
any of their fault.
No, we figured out the
we
problem.
We didn't have an intern on spam duty. We do now.
Yeah. It was like
we got a couple,
technical glitch, and we've got it worked out.
Yeah,
it's the important thing is it's fixed now, but we have to make amends. We have to make things right, and so we're going to play sort of like what we figure is sort of like
it's certainly the most ego boosting.
It is, and it also sort of encapsulates what the other thousands and thousands of messages had to say. So we do appreciate that. We hope you stick around.
Yeah.
But why don't we let's talk about our next episode here?
Yeah, well, we're continuing to break ground.
Every episode, something new. I can't believe this. 2021 is shaping up to be just innovation central.
Yeah, we're just taking podcasting to different levels.
Right.
And
really, that have never been done before.
I don't think so.
By this podcast.
No. Oh, absolutely not. No, yeah.
Right.
So we mentioned, I think it was last episode or the episode in December, maybe. We were guests on the podcast Two Beards, Please.
Yeah. Well, that was in December. It was their Christmas episode.
It was their Christmas episode, and I think we may have mentioned it in our Christmas episode or our December episode.
We did, yeah.
And so we have invited the Beards.
The Beards, as they call themselves.
Nate C. and Drew, as I call him, Andrew, as he's known on their podcast.
On Two Beards, Please. Two Beards, Please is the podcast.
We've invited them to be on our podcast, just kind of a
reciprocating the
right.
Yeah.
And we're gonna do something a little bit different. We're gonna let them pick the movies. What we are gonna do in that conversation, and this might be something we continue. We kind of hope to continue this. Is having people on, and they're gonna tell us which movie they would want to talk about. Maybe it's a favorite movie, or maybe it's just a movie they have always wanted to talk to people about, or it's a movie they think people should think differently about, or more people should be thinking about.
So maybe it's a movie they're confused by,
right?
And
maybe
they need us to kind of help sort things out.
Ideas around, so we are going to be talking to Nate and Drew, and they have selected the movies MASH, directed by Robert Altman.
We haven't done an Altman.
We haven't done a Robert Altman.
I love Robert Altman. How did that even happen? 91 episodes in, and we didn't talk about Robert Altman?
I don't know. I mean, there's 91 Robert Altman movies. How would you pick one?
Right.
So, So we're going to fill in that gap in our
So thanks to
archives.
the Beards.
Thanks to the Beards. Yeah, specifically the Beard called Nate.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be watching Pollock from 2000, directed by and starring Ed Harris. We're having the Beards on, and we're gonna talk about this movie kind of through their feelings about them.
We're gonna find out why they wanted to talk about it.
Yeah,
we're gonna kind of dig through their thoughts on it and our thoughts on it. We're gonna watch. Right. We're all gonna watch it.
We're all gonna watch it. It's gonna be.
You're gonna watch it as listeners.
You're gonna watch it, or even if you've seen it, rewatch it. Yeah, and we're finding ourselves really curious to hear why do movies connect with people, or what's going on. We kind of feel like, in the last 7 years, we've been able to kind of do a little bit of therapy through movies and conversation, and not that we're like, extending that service to other people, but we want to kind of hear what other people have to say about their relationships with movies and what they think.
I think over the years we've been surprised by how much they can just kind of be this portal into ourselves, really.
Right.
I think, there reaches a point where, and maybe it's 91 episodes, where I'm
That's
not going to
what
say
the studies are saying. The studies are showing it's about 91 episodes.
That's not to say we're tapped out necessarily on talking with each other, but I think there is going to be a new dimension to bringing some more people on here and getting their perspective on things and figuring out what it is that movies do to all of us.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
It will be fun.
So watch these movies with us, and we want to not only bring the Beards into the conversation, we want to bring the listeners' beards into the conversation. If you have a beard.
Anybody, and a beard. I think a beard is more of like a spiritual thing.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a literal beard.
No.
Bring your beard, whatever that means, into the conversation and give us your thoughts on MASH and on Pollock or on any of our past episodes or this episode. Did you see Coming to America or Coming to America? We want to hear it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways you can reach out to us. Ryan, how about what are those ways?
Oh, well, one of them, head over to facebook.com, find Can We Still Be Friends podcast. We're there. We're on Instagram, or as Nate likes to call it, the
Insta.
Gram.
Oh, yes, the Gram.
You used to call it Insta.
I'm changing it up a little bit.
Okay. And we are there at Can We Still Be Friends pod. We also, of course, have our website, canwestillbefriends.net. You can comment on the episode directly. You can email us. The email address is feedback@canwestillbefriends.net. And there's always, you can either record a voice memo and send that in an email, or you can give us a call at a phone number that Nate has memorized.
And we are monitoring at this point.
We are, yes.
I promise.
Yeah.
847-306-9532 is the number.
Yeah. So let us know. We always appreciate the feedback. We appreciate you as listeners.
If you want to show your appreciation even further, feel free to leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or write up a little tiny review. And also just share the podcast. Let your family, friends, people you love, people you hate even.
Might as well.
Share it around. Share
Especially
the love.
if you don't like it, share it with people you hate.
Yeah. We found that that's very successful, actually. If you don't like somebody, sharing our podcast tends to, only increase that relationship.
Yeah, and we hate listens count as a download.
That's right.
We don't really care.
A download's a download. Well, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and thank you for this. This has been groundbreaking. Doing the movie and its sequel.
Yeah.
So, thank you for joining us on this groundbreaking expedition that we just did.
We're excited for us. We're excited for you.
Right.
And we'll catch you next time.
All right. See you later.
What's up? Can we still be friends? This is your buddy Tim. I'm proud and honored to be able to say that we're buddies. Just wanted to give you a quick call, long-time listener, second-time caller over all these years. Wanted to give you a quick call to say T. Hanks for all the time and effort you guys put into the podcast. It has meant a lot to me over the years, and especially recently. I'm so glad you safely and at the appropriate time, found your way out of quarantine to get together and continue more episodes, because the last couple especially have just been rich for me. So thanks for all you do. The Five Bloods episode was huge. You nailed it. So many layers to that I felt like were so timely, so important, and you guys gave the rest of us an opportunity to process in an important way. So thanks for doing that. The way that you drew out the nuance of the Babadook and kind of how that plays into any parents right now during pandemic situations, and the monster that is lurking if we don't pay attention to the way we live. Anyway, just a lot of stuff that have meant a lot to me. Made me think and enjoyed those movies even more. So thanks for all you do. Keep doing it. I know that you guys do it for your own enjoyment, but thanks for doing it and letting us listen in. All right. Peace, guys.
Hey, guys. This is Dan. There's a lot of different movies that you guys have gone over these past few weeks, so I'll focus just a little bit on Small Axe. But before that, I'm glad I watched Time. I loved it. It was just a beautiful documentary, and then I'm thinking of Ending Things was also really cool, but I'll leave it since it's already been a couple of episodes before. But with Small Axe, just thought it was really well done. I love some of the still shots that McQueen used to capture these moments. To not make this too long, I'll just say the one that stood out to me probably the most was the red, white, and blue one, where the dad basically called out his name, ran up to him, gave him a hug, like it just, destroyed me. And then last thing, with Alex Wheatley, that episode, it really reminded me about one of my boys, who also his name's Alex. I'm not going to go over his history, but basically we adopted him, and he's been through some stuff, and it just really resonated with me. I won't go into details for obvious reasons, but I'm so glad you guys recommended it, and I'm glad I watched it. Thanks again for suggesting all these great movies and documentaries and miniseries. Bye.